doesn't want me to drag it across. But anyway, I've got the list here. And so now, this is from Dr. Theo Colborne. And this is, I'll leave it here and you can have a look at it afterwards if you want. You can see the list. But it's now up to 980 chemicals that she has managed to identify that are used in the hydraulic fracturing process in the US. And she's extended that and shown the impact that they have on the various organs, the percentage that are used, etc., etc. But the oil industry says, no, that's nothing to do with us. In the US, the oil and gas industry has no legal requirement to acknowledge or report any contamination of water, soil or air. This is thanks to Dick Cheney, who in 2005 introduced what is called the Halliburton loophole. That's all you need to remember for the search process, the Halliburton loophole. Because it covers a whole tranche of legislation exempting the oil and gas industry from having to acknowledge or report any contamination whatsoever. This is how it is that the likes of Cameron and the Quadrilla management team are able to say, but there's never been any proven case of frac fluids causing any contamination in the US, because they hide behind the fact because there's no requirement to report it. In the US, in Pennsylvania, in Colorado, in New Mexico, if a landowner suddenly finds that their water is contaminated, like it tastes awful, or it's causing rashes, what happens is the gas company will come along and deliver a buffalo tank, which is basically 20,000 gallons of fresh water, and it will agree to keep replenishing the buffalo tank, providing they sign this document that states that they will not in any way, shape or form criticise or blame the gas company for causing the contamination. If they refuse to sign it, the buffalo tank's taken away. This is how they control the population. What I'm going to show you a couple of clips. These are from Australia. The first one is the Monk Ranch, the Monk family ranch. They bought the ranch about 7 years ago. They knew it sat over 2 gas licenses, but the gas licenses had been dormant for some years, so they gambled that there wasn't any great risk. Unfortunately, 4 years later, in 2009, the gas industry moved into southern Queensland. And although they have no gas infrastructure on their property whatsoever, the gas industry is all around them. And I'm going to show you an animation of the phenomenal unconventional gas industry that's been established in southern Queensland in a very, very short timescale. Now obviously the population density is much thinner than here in the UK, and the population acknowledged that they were caught asleep at the wheel. And unfortunately, because of the scale of the country, and because obviously of the much more reduced population, in Australia they've literally had to resort to saying, well, we've just got to keep it out of our area, because they can't, at the moment, really get enough resources to try and ban it in the country. But nonetheless, the awareness in Australia is increasing, and in southern Queensland the infrastructure is in place, it is producing, but they're not exporting yet, so it's not being ramped up. So there are some plans to try and prevent it being ramped up to the next stage. But what I want to show you is the first clip, November 25th last year. It's the end of the dry season, and the Monk family, Brian, his wife Kathy and their son Barry, are sitting around the table on the veranda. There's a gentle breeze blowing, and in the middle of the table is a gas detector. Now it's not a cheap gas detector, but it's not an outrageously expensive one. This gas detector will pick up 10 non-indigenous gases. We can't see from the video exactly what gases it's picking up, but it will be primarily methane, because that's what's being mined from beneath them.
That's unbelievable. That is actually scary. Well, that didn't help. Can you stop it from clicking?
Oh, that's just to say that
we're safe here now, is it?
I'm pushing your way more. There we go, come back, still in the air. I'm just sort of trying to press the fresh air through.
Wow. That knob's from cow farts.
Wild farts.
Wild farts.
Methane only?
No.
Oh.
Head gases. No
Is there a list
No
of
comment.
10
Now, methane is lighter than air. So basically the methane is rising. So what you're seeing here is that there's effectively a constant stream of methane coming past that gas meter. Now, if you actually search for the long-term health effects of exposure to methane, you'll find ridiculous statements saying that there is no long-term health risk. In reality, what's happened is the oil and gas industry has shut down research into long-term exposure to methane. Wonder why that is. In the film Split Estate, you will see the effects, the common denominator of people who've lived in communities that have been heavily fracked for 20 years, and the common denominator is people going into early dementia. Long-term exposure to methane, according to Dr. Theo Colborn, she considers that methane is a neuroinhibitor, it's a neurotoxin, neuroinhibitor, and as well as being an endocrine disruptor. So just being exposed to it on the short term isn't necessarily going to cause any noticeable impact. The other gases or other releases certainly are probably what triggers the headaches and the nosebleeds that the Monk family get. But what really triggered Brian's interest in this was when he put his grandkids in the bath one day and they screamed that the water was burning them. And you'll see that again being recounted in the documentary Split Estate from Colorado. Now, it's the end of the dry season. In the next clip, Brian and Barry are going to walk about 100 metres away from the house. The ground is hard baked. But look at what happens when they crack open the surface.
Today? Okay. Bring in the workforce. And we've got quite a deflection. I don't know whether the camera can pick that up.
I spoke to Brian at the end of April, the end of the wet season in Queensland. And Brian said, Ian, you wouldn't believe it, mate. He said, I'm looking out across the field and all I can see is a sea of bubbles. Now, Brian has started to put a lot of videos that he's taken. He's got some excellent video footage, which is actually included in the documentary that I talked about from Marco Jackson, showing the contamination into the Condamine River, and then walking downstream and showing the impact that the contamination has on the fish life in the river. In the next clip I'm going to show you, now when I told Mark Miller, the former Chief Executive Officer of Quadrilla, that I had this footage and I was going to show this footage, Miller's response was, you don't have that footage. I said, sorry? He said, no, you don't have that footage. He said, it's not possible, it doesn't happen. And I said, oh really? He said, well, if you do have that footage, you're the victim of a conjurer's trick. Now this is classic cognitive dissonance. And, regrettably, when I was recruiting in the oil industry in the late 80s, I used to say to the graduates, I say, look, you cannot come into this industry if you have any real interest in geopolitics. Because at the time, with Schlumberger, we were working for both the national oil companies in Iraq and in Iran. It wasn't our problem that they were knocking 7 barrels of hell out of each other at the time. Unfortunately, what these guys are doing is they've now extended that to saying, well, you actually can't work in this industry if you have any real care about the impact that what you're releasing into the environment is going to have any negative effect on the ecology or on the people living above those locations. It's literal cognitive dissonance. It's just blocking out any negative because they are so vested in that industry. So let's have a look at this footage that doesn't exist.